A sure sign of spring in Manhattan is the annual series Rendezvous with French Cinema Today at the Walter Reed Theater. Jointly sponsored by the Film Society of Lincoln Center and Unifrance, the French Film Office, the screenings offer a survey of the best cinema from Europe's leading producer of films, France. Series organizer Richard Pena tells Canape what's hot and what's not, charting the movements of old masters and the stirrings of young discoveries.
Rendezvous with French Cinema Today is a program that's produced jointly by the Film Society of Lincoln Center and Unifrance Film, and the French Film Office here in New York, which represents Unifrance, which presents about a dozen new French features each year in March in New York City. The purpose of it is to show the continued vitality of French cinema and to give American audiences the broadest possible picture of contemporary French production. One of the things I like so much about contemporary French cinema is that it remains a cinema of chance takers. From, I think, from the beginning of French cinema, I think the notion of risk, of trying things new, of extending boundaries has always been very much part of French cinema, and unhappily today I feel in our own American cinema people are so, how could you say, consumed by the sure thing that we often have films that seem like endless remakes, whereas in France you have again and again filmmakers testing the boundaries, seeing how far they can go, not only in provocative, shocking ways, but in ways that are often highly personal. Take a work such, for example, as Hasard et Coïncidence by Claude Lelouch. I mean, here's a deeply personal film by one of France's most established directors, where in many ways the film can be described as a kind of act of whimsy. There is a way in which it really is a fantasy of a man and a woman and how they might get together. It has lots of extraordinary sequences done in remarkable locations. In many ways, it's almost a dream about the cinema as much as it's a film.
Il y a trois sortes de gens qui disent la vérité. Les imbéciles, les enfants et les ivrognes.
Et les danseuses.
Tandis que les hasards et les coïncidences, eux, ils se trompent pas, ils sont beaucoup plus forts que nous, ils peuvent prévoir des siècles à l'avance.
Hasard ou coïncidence, Byzance ou Trafalgar, Mozart ou l'innocence, ignorance ou brouillard, tintamarre ou nuisance, obédience ou beaux-arts, victoire ou suffisance, l'apparence ou l'histoire, faux départ ou balance, déférence ou beau pas, avoir ou dépendance, abondance ou dollar, un écart ou l'errance, turbulence ou bazar, paillardise ou licence, jouissance ou bande à part.
We have in the show the third film directed by Nicole Garcia. This film, Place Vendôme, is an interesting example of a director who established very solid credentials as what you might think of as a kind of auteur in her first two films, with very, very deeply personal works. A Weekend for Two and then the Preferred Son, or The Favorite Son, were both sort of classic auteur works in a way, done that were sort of interesting and very intimate examinations of family life and the kind of pressures that go on within that. Here, she's kind of taken some of those ideas, but is working them out within a more genre-like format. In many ways, the film is a kind of thriller.
Calendrier, un accord entre nous. Vous ne respectez pas.
Est-ce que vous pensez qu'il y a des gens qui ont la conscience tranquille?
C'est quoi qui fait la valeur d'un diamant? La perfection? Le prix?
Vous connaissez cette histoire? Oui. Menteuse.
The works and personalities of Henri Matisse and Pablo Picasso could fill a city full of museums. Virtually all modern art issues from their influence, and yet they are seldom considered together. A new exhibit at the Kimball Art Museum in Fort Worth, Texas, Matisse and Picasso, A Gentle Rivalry, puts them side by side. Harvard professor and curator Yve-Alain talks with Canape about what these giants meant to each other.
I hope this is a show that conveys the idea that it's very hard to be an artist and you have to work very seriously and you face many, many challenges. And here you have two artists that have self-challenged themselves. You know, they have designed their work as being challenged by the most talented other artists. They were not obliged to do that. Why not? Why no? They could very well have said, you know, we go each in our little, you know, bungalow. No. They wanted to be challenged by the most talented other guy. You don't play with someone you don't respect. It's not fun. They really respect each other very much. Yeah. And I think, you know, this is the kind of moral that I hope people get. You know, I've been working on each of them separately, and you know, they really represent single-handedly. I mean, the two of them represent the source for all modern art, and their work, which is very, very varied and very profuse. Picasso, of course, produced much more than Matisse, but you know, their work is extremely varied, and so they encompass all possibilities of 20th century art. So that's the idea that we will learn more about the way they thought by having a close look on their interaction. You know, down to me one day, just you know, said, well, we should do that. They very early on, really very early on, in 1906, it became very clear to each other that the other was the most important other, and that there was only one person that they could measure themselves to. Was for Picasso was Matisse, and for Matisse was Picasso. It came very, very early on. This painting by Matisse, Still Life as Magnolia, he painted it in 1941, and it's one of the few paintings he exhibited during the war. He exhibited 4 paintings during the war. 3 of them actually are in the show. He himself considered it to be his masterpiece. I mean, at least in 1946, which is 5 years after he'd done it, he said it was his best painting. He really adored that painting, and it's really quintessential Matisse, the way in which the objects are floating in this sort of ocean of color, the way it gives a feeling of being expanding. Now, when Picasso saw this painting, we know from François Gillot's testimony that he didn't like it. He didn't like the way the things float. I think it was, you know, didn't make any sense to it. And what's very interesting is that his response, in a way, is this kind of canvas. You know, he takes the same idea of having one color as a background, but you can see how, for him, objects have to be sort of imprisoned in a straitjacket of, you know, have to be anchored in space and can't move. And so the two universes of those two artists are very different. This is very claustrophobic. You know, you feel contrite. This, on the contrary, is producing this, you know, universe that is endlessly expanding. But you can also see that they try to communicate. They use the same vocabulary. They use the same, you know, even in terms of size and all that. So there are things in this painting that Matisse would not have done without Picasso, and in fact only dares at this point of his life, which is late 30s, a strange moment where he reinvests Cubism. He's interested again in Cubism. We don't know quite exactly why he got so interested in Cubism again in 1937, 1938, but he did. So one of the things that you have here, which is typical of Cubism, is a dissociation of color and contour. There's a drawing that doesn't match the color, the shape of the color planes. The hair loops are drawn, and you can see, you know, at some point the hair is even blue. You know, I mean, because it doesn't. It's like dissociated. It's drawn on color, and it's two different things. This is something that comes from Cubism in Cubist collage all the time in 1911. Matisse could not do that. Did not like doing that. It was not his way of painting. And here suddenly he accepts doing that. Something else, which is also very Picasso-like, is the way the kind of exaggeration of discontinuities. For example, the stripe motif of the Romanian blouse doesn't connect at all to the anatomy of the shoulder. It's flat. It's a kind of, once again, dissociations of levels that is typical of coming from Picasso and Cubism. They felt they were the last pillars of a tradition that they had helped renew. I think they felt that they both represented the continuation and the only possible way to continue the tradition of figurative art. And that on their shoulders were basically the fate of figurative art in the West.
Admired by such American masters as Martin Scorsese and Paul Schrader, 91-year-old French director Robert Bresson is a filmmaker's filmmaker. A complete retrospective of his influential films tours the United States throughout spring 1999. Film critic and American correspondent for the French film journal Cahiers du Cinéma, Kent Jones, explains to Canape the unique style and quiet power of the films.
You know, the short answer about why have a retrospective of the films of Robert Bresson is just that he's one of the greatest filmmakers in the world. I don't think that there's anyone who's more where economy of means, where economy of expression, and where artistic ambition meet, where they're actually one, the way that they are in Bresson's cinema. He's really kind of unparalleled in that sense. He's also, I think, in purely formal terms, he's a master of rhythm. He understands the rhythm of action, the rhythm of montage, the way that sound elements can be used rhythmically better than anyone. The other thing that's interesting about his work, and that's often been commented on, is that he never uses actors. He never uses the same performer twice, and whenever he has an actor, a performer in his work, they're instructed not to act. They're instructed to read their lines in a very flat way and to drain themselves of emotion as much as possible, to do things as automatically as possible, so that the natural emotion that emanates from them, so that their natural spirit will emerge as they're not acting, but as they're being.
J'ai fait semblant de dormir.
These boots are made for walkin', goes the old song. But footwear is both an industry and an important fashion art. In the current exhibit, Shoes, a Lexicon of Style, at the Museum of the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York, a dazzling range of the art of shoes is on display. Curator Valerie Steele talks to Canape about how we use shoes to define ourselves and about the ways French and American designers have influenced one another.
Shoes, a Lexicon of Style, was not intended to be a history of footwear or a study of any individual designer. Instead, it's an exploration of the symbolism and social psychology of shoes. Some of the reasons why there's a little bit of Imelda Marcos in so many women. There are about 7 or 8 different French designers in the exhibit, and they range from really classic figures like Roger Vivier and Claire Géry to modern designers like Azzedine Alaïa and Jean-Paul Gaultier, and very important new stars of shoe design like Christian Louboutin. It's hard to say whether there's an explicitly French style of shoe design. Shoes, like fashion in general, have become more and more international. We could say that American shoes tend to be sportier and French shoes tend to be more formal and feminine, but actually all of those boundaries are starting to disappear. Roger Vivier is one of the really pivotal figures in the history of 20th century shoes, both because on his own he was so influential in creating new shoe shapes like the comma heel, and also because of his work with designers like Christian Dior and later Yves Saint Laurent. He helped effect a kind of marriage between shoe design and haute couture. I think a young designer like Christian Louboutin has come to be an international star because of a certain whimsy in his designs. So they're not only elegant and feminine, but there's something a little bit amusing and ironical about them, which is very appropriate for a modern sensibility, or perhaps we should say a postmodern sensibility. The symbolism of shoes is an extremely complicated subject, and yet one which is very close to our hearts. We all know, for example, that high heels are regarded as this style which is most connected with status, sex, femininity, and fashion. And in this exhibition, we wanted to explore some of the reasons why, what high heels do to your body, how it makes you not just taller and slimmer, but also curvier looking, and how a style which used to be for men as well, remember Louis XIV wore red high-heeled shoes, has become, since the 19th century, exclusively feminine, and therefore ultimately the prime sartorial symbol of erotic femininity. Other shoe styles, such as the boot, have a very different kind of symbolism, so that boots have a history of being associated with masculine, military, and horseback riding styles. Boots protect your ankle and your shin and are very appropriate for marching over long distances or riding horseback. When worn by a woman, therefore, the boot connotes a kind of appropriation of male phallic power, as well as the addition of a new image of sexual power and the idea of the domina. Sandals are also another very important shoe style because they're the closest thing you have to going barefoot. And you'll see some of the sandals in the show really are nothing more than a sole attached to the foot by straps. And I think, as Louboutin said, the pleasure of this has to do with being so close to being barefoot. I think everyone who spent time in France knows how, until very recently, you could spot an American on the streets of Paris instantly by the fact that he or she was wearing sneakers. Now, American style, in some respects, has spread to France, and the idea of sport shoes, of sneakers, running shoes, athletic shoes, this has been incorporated into French fashion, both on a popular level with designs by French companies like No Name, and also an incorporation into French high fashion with high-heeled sneakers, for example, by Jean-Paul Gaultier, and even Hermès doing very expensive deluxe sneakers.
It's common for fathers and sons to speak, but when the father is a noted French philosopher with impeccable secular credentials, and the son is a Buddhist monk who translates for the Dalai Lama, It's time to listen to what they're saying. Canape lends its ear as Jean-François and Mathieu Ricard talk about the recent English translation of their best-selling book, The Monk and the Philosopher. A father and son discuss the meaning of life.
Alors, ce qui nous a poussé à écrire ce livre, ou plus exactement à le parler, car je tiens à souligner qu'il n'a pas été réécrit. Hein. C'est à peu près fidèlement la conversation que nous avons eue. Et j'ai tenu, si vous voulez, à ce que cela reste sur le ton de la conversation, puisque un entretien est un entretien et écrire est autre chose. Les motivations sont multiples. Pour moi, à titre personnel, donc, mieux comprendre l'itinéraire de Mathieu, puisque donc il avait poussé ses études et son activité de chercheur scientifique assez loin, et qu'est-ce qui avait pu l'amener à un retournement aussi important dans sa vie personnelle.
Curieusement, les gens ont toujours l'impression que je sois lâché une vie scientifique. Bon, j'ai lâché, c'est peut-être au jour le jour matériellement, mais que j'ai fait un grand saut intellectuel. Alors, pour moi, je n'ai jamais ressenti ça comme ça. J'ai toujours eu l'impression de poursuivre une recherche. La science, pour moi, c'est une recherche de la vérité. Donc, les sciences naturelles s'adressent à la description, à l'explication des phénomènes naturels, ou éventuellement, si c'est ou biologique, ou même psychologique. Donc, pour moi, tout ça, c'était en fait, ça s'est produit en ligne, dans une même continuité. Et bien que, extérieurement, bien sûr, j'ai quitté la France pour m'établir dans l'Himalaya, mais intérieurement, pour moi, c'était la même recherche que j'ai poursuivie au fil des années.
Il s'intéressait à des quantités de choses passionnantes comme l'édition et la traduction en français et en anglais des textes sacrés tibétains, Moyen-Âge, qu'il faisait imprimer à Delhi.
L'ensemble de la philosophie bouddhiste était très méconnu, et que ce n'est pas une philosophie simpliste. Il y a des traités, je ne sais pas, de la perception, il y a des traités des sciences cognitives, il y a des traités de métaphysique, et tout ça est rempli des volumes et des volumes en tibétain, bien sûr, ou en d'autres langues, en sanskrit ou en pali, et c'est vrai que c'était très peu connu. Et c'est un peu en sorte comme si on ouvrait un vieux coffre et qu'on trouve toutes les œuvres de Platon brusquement au XXe siècle. Il est normal qu'en plus d'un phénomène de mode, il y ait aussi un grand intérêt intellectuel, une grande curiosité intellectuelle pour cet édifice philosophique.
Il ne s'agit pas simplement d'un livre sur le bouddhisme, puisque quand même le cœur du livre et sa raison d'être, c'est une confrontation entre la pensée occidentale et la pensée orientale, ou une des formes de la pensée orientale, ou de la spiritualité orientale. Et je crois que en France, c'est une des explications que je donne, si vous voulez, c'est que comment comprendre à partir de la culture philosophique traditionnelle en Occident, c'est-à-dire essentiellement grecque, française, allemande, etc., une doctrine comme le bouddhisme. Et ce facteur-là, si vous voulez, est aussi une des clés, disons, de la curiosité du public, puisqu'il s'agissait d'un dialogue Orient-Occident.
Le chemin spirituel que présente le bouddhisme a un aspect extrêmement pragmatique. C'est-à-dire que c'est vraiment quelque chose qui analyse pour tout et chacun les mécanismes du bonheur et de la souffrance, comment notamment faire une différence, par exemple, entre la notion de plaisir et la notion de bonheur, comment non seulement avoir les idées claires à ce sujet, mais intégrer ça dans notre vie de tous les jours. Donc toute cette richesse de techniques, de méthodes, d'approfondissement d'une spiritualité personnelle, je pense que c'est là quelque chose qui attire et intéresse beaucoup le public occidental et qui était effectivement mal connu jusqu'il y a 20 ans.
Mais moi, je dirais que ce qui me dérange dans le bouddhisme, j'ai établi dans mon livre notre livre, plusieurs comparaisons avec certaines des philosophies de l'Antiquité. L'une des raisons du succès du bouddhisme en Occident actuellement, c'est cette possibilité, si vous voulez, au moment où évidemment les morales de l'Antiquité ont cessé d'être pratiquées, de donner un certain pragmatisme, comme le disait Mathieu, à la conduite de la vie, en direction du bonheur et du bien, que les philosophies occidentales avaient perdu depuis longtemps.